We need to talk about lobbyists.
Yes, let's do it, please.
What's a lobbyist do, and how does that kind of work qualify you to be a member of Congress?
Listen, my opponents have a lot of fun with the term lobbying, and I understand kind of the toxicity.
They're
of
not
the term.
exactly lauded in a lot of
That's right.
circles. I think
That's
you know
right. They're
that.
not. They're not. Listen, it's advocacy. And let me give you a couple examples, and then we can really get into some of the concerns people have about lobbying. But let me give you a couple examples of what it really means. Mark Lunsford, who lost his daughter Jessica to a sexual predator in 2005. I met him one day when he was lobbying for funding for the Marshal Service to go after sex offenders, and he wasn't able to get it done. For everything he had accomplished to get the law in place, he wasn't able to get funding for the Marshal Service. I said, I want to help you, Mark. And so, pro bono, he and I, for 2 years, worked to secure nearly $60 million for the Marshal Service to go after sex offenders, to help our communities be safer, our children to be safer. Now, technically, that makes me a lobbyist. That makes Mark Lunsford a lobbyist. I've also worked with a local business in Pinellas County that developed technology to detect roadside bombs at a distance, so our men and women in uniform don't have to be in contact with them before they detect them. We accomplished two things I did as their lobbyist. First, we grew that small company from 3 people to 30 people, 30 employees now in Pinellas County. And secondly, we got those units deployed to Iraq this year, so they're in the field protecting the lives of soldiers.
Now, it's a business, so people pay you to be their advocate in
Right.
Congress, and I assume they pay you because of your background in knowing your ways around the halls
Sure,
and what's behind
sure.
door number 1 and what's behind door
Right.
number 2. In this campaign, you've already been accused of lobbying for more offshore oil drilling,
Right.
for the dictator of Pakistan. Those people do have lobbyists.
Sure.
They do have advocates in the halls of Congress.
Sure.
Were you one of them?
Sure. So let's go back to being paid as an advocate, if you will. The University of South Florida has a Department of Government Affairs. The city of Tampa has a Department of Government Affairs. The city of St. Petersburg, Clearwater. As an organization, they determine whether to vest responsibility for advocacy internally with one of their employees, or they decide to contract out with somebody perhaps in Washington, D.C., or who has more experience than their internal staff. That's simply deciding the best use of resources. So USF, for instance, has used internal government affairs relations professionals, but they've also used external because they want to make sure if they're involved in dealing with the government, they have the best shot at dealing with the government in a favorable way. Now, my opponents have a lot of fun going to the records and saying he lobbied for this, he lobbied for that. The two you mentioned are absolute falsehoods. So I have never lobbied for increased offshore oil drilling.
Did a company you work for lobby for offshore?
No. So here's the two issues. I represented a free market think tank on offshore oil drilling. I actually didn't represent them on energy whatsoever. I represented them on transparency of public employee pension actuarials. Now,
Fascinating.
Fascinating, right? But the idea was there were several towns in the country that had gone bankrupt. The pension beneficiaries then were left with nothing. Municipalities do not have to comply with the same gap procedures that the private sector does. So our initiative was to say municipalities and states with pension plans have to disclose their actuarial analysis. They don't have to change it. They don't have to change their formulas, but they have to disclose it. It was a transparency rule. Now, in the course of meeting with several congressional leaders, including Paul Ryan, one of the issues that came up was energy independence. The moment, and listen, I'm an attorney. I take compliance very seriously. The moment a topic is discussed on Capitol Hill, if I'm a registered lobbyist, I have to disclose it was discussed. That's very different than saying either I'm for it, against it, or I even lobbied for it, and that's not the case. The important thing that my opponent always wants to avoid is where we actually stand on the issues. So my position on oil drilling. I worked on the current ban in the Eastern Gulf. The 230-mile ban is something that I worked on when I was a member of the congressional staff. I support the ban in the Eastern Gulf. I do support continued exploration in the central and western regions of the Gulf, which is actually the current compromise through 2022. Pakistan, I had nothing to do with Pakistan.
You ever been to Pakistan?
I've never been.
Pakistan.
Listen,
never met the dictator.
I didn't realize until I woke up and saw the same commercial you did that I was so closely related to Musharraf, but apparently my opponent wants you to think I am.
You're